You did everything right. Went to school, studied, stressed, and graduated. And your reward? A LinkedIn notification telling you you're a top applicant, which means absolutely nothing, by the way. Because here's an interesting number for you: 10.5%. That's the current unemployment rate for Americans aged 16 to 24. The overall US unemployment rate, 4.3%. So Gen Z, the most educated generation in American history, is unemployed at more than double the national rate. And nobody is really talking about why. So let's talk about it. Before we talk about the job market, let's talk about the generation. Because I think people forget what Gen Z actually walked through to get here. If you were born in 1997 and 2012, you were a kid during the 2008 financial crisis. You watched your parents stressed about money before you even know what the word money was actually about. Then, right when you're about to enter adulthood, 2020 happens. That's right, a global pandemic shuts down the entire world. Your senior year? Gone. Your college experience? Zoom calls in your childhood bedroom. And your first job search was during a historic economic shutdown. And the mental toll of that is actually very, very real. The fact speaks about this that 61% of Gen Z repeat increased economic stress during COVID. And according to the Oxford Economics, Gen Z is the first generation in modern history to be poorer than their parents. And that is actually worrying. Then, just as things starts opening back up, the tech layoffs hit. 2022 to 2024, Meta, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, over 200,000 jobs got cut. The dream companies that you're hoping to get inside, they're gone. And now, in 2025, quarter one, the GDP contracted to 0.3%. The consumer spending dropped to 30 billion in a single month. And recession risk is at 40%. In the middle of all that mental chaos, there's a war in Ukraine happening, and a war in the Middle East, and an economy that feels like it's being held together with a duct tape and hope. So when someone asks you this, why can Gen Z get a job? Maybe, just maybe, the question is a little bit more complicated than that. Here's the story Gen Z was told. You need to go to college, get a degree, get hired, build a life for you and your family. Simple, linear, and safe. Except, tuition costs rose by 36.7% from 2010 to 2023, above inflation, and way above what salaries grew. So Gen Z took most of the student debt in any generation we have so far. Gen Z was competing in a job market that needed them to have experience while they were just starting out. The entry level, they needed 3 to 5 years of experience. I genuinely need someone to explain that logic to me because it sounds stupid and it seems like a joke, but it's actually the reality. And it's just the job market as we know it of today. Between January 2024 and mid-2025, entry-level job postings dropped to 29%. Meanwhile, the application per job post rose by 30%. And on Handshake, one of the biggest entry-level platforms, job postings fell by 15%. That's all the number that I have to give to you. Now I want you to swallow that in. So more people chasing fewer jobs. And here's the number that should make every guidance counselor uncomfortable. The unemployment rate for recent college graduates, ages 22 to 27, rose to 5.6% in 2025. That's nearly the same as the unemployment rate for people without a degree. And let that sink in. The degree premium, the whole reason you were told to go to college, is shrinking. And 51% of Gen Z already think that their degree is such a waste of money. And 68% of Gen Z believe they could do their job without it. But here's what's interesting. Gen Z is actually smart. They aren't just sitting around, idling, waiting for the old system to fix itself. They're quietly, and sometimes loudly, building a different one. And the data on where they're actually moving is actually fascinating. 37% of Gen Z graduates are now pursuing blue collars and trade jobs. We're talking about electricians, plumber, technician, and even welders. These are jobs that, when we think about a decade ago, were less than a college degree. And people will often look down on them because jobs that now starts at around $80,000 a year, they can't be outsourced to AI. And they can't be done from a server farm in another country. Because the pipes in your house don't really care about that automation. And Gen Z actually looked looked at that and said, hell yeah, I want in. And for them, that actually makes more sense than a $120,000 student debt for a marketing degree with no job attached at all. At the same time, despite the layoffs, Gen Z is still gravitating towards tech. But I would say differently. They're not trying to necessarily get hired at Google anymore, but they're using these tech skills, AI tools, digital marketing, content creation, project management software, to stay relevant across industries. Gen Z is moving into tech roles at a net gain of 70% compared to other industries. We're talking about healthcare, financial services, and even operations. They're bringing tech skills into every field because every field needs them now. And then there's this. 52% of Gen Z workers are actually freelancers, more than any other generation. The millennials, 44%. Gen X, 30%. And boomers, only 26%. And Gen Z, like I mentioned, 52%, and the numbers is actually still growing. And these aren't just side hustles. 52% of Gen Z freelancers actually work 40 plus hours a week. That's almost like a full-time job. And the top reasons why they're doing this is because they have control over schedule flexibility, work from anywhere, and a passion-driven work. Not because they're actually lazy, but because they watched the corporate world lay off their parents and decided maybe loyalty to one company over 30 years of period isn't the right move. And here's a number to differ. The average Gen Z job tenure is about 1.1 years, and the internet wants to call that disloyalty. I'd call it pattern recognition. Sounds a bit too fancy, but that's just about it. Here's the part that doesn't actually show up in the data, and that is the weight of all of this. There's actually a study from Deloitte, their 2025 Gen Z and Millennial survey, and one number jumped out at me. When they asked how much income do they need to feel financially secure, Gen Z said $600,000. Not because they're a woo-woo or what we call delusional, but because the cost of a normal life, we're talking about rent, food, healthcare, student loans, maybe a car, has gotten out of reach. The security feels like a fantasy, and it's not just about the money. It's about identity. Gen Z was told, you are what you do. Your job is your worth. Your title is your identity. And then funny enough, the job market actually said, we don't have room for you. That's not just a financial problem. That's an existential one. And I think out of all of these things that I've just mentioned, Gen Z deserves to hear someone say, this is not your fault. You didn't actually fail the system. The system failed to keep up with the world that changed faster than it could adapt. You graduated into a pandemic, into layoffs, into AI disruption, and into geopolitical chaos. And you're still here, still applying, still trying to figure it out. That's not a weakness in my opinion. That's actually very remarkable. And again, I'm not going to sit here all day and give you a 10-step plan because I don't think that's what this moment needs. But I will say this. The generation that is being called unemployable is also the most entrepreneurial generation in modern history. 52% freelancing, moving into trade, tech, and remote work on their own terms. Building income streams that don't require a corner office or a 30-year pension plan. The rules changed and Gen Z actually noticed, and Gen Z is quietly writing new ones. The job market as it existed for previous generation, it's not coming back. But that's actually not the worst news, because the skills that actually matter right now, communication, adaptability, digital fluency, problem solving, Gen Z has actually those in abundance. The question isn't whether Gen Z can compete. The question is, compete in what game? The old game, it's probably not worth fighting for. The new one is actually wide open. If you're in the middle of a job search right now, and it feels like you're doing everything right and getting nothing back, just know the data backs you up. And it's not in your head. The market is genuinely harder than it's been since the pandemic. But the people who are finding their footing aren't necessarily the ones with the best resume. They're the ones who stopped waiting for the old system to validate them and started building something the new system actually needs. And I made another video going to the specific remote and skill-based freelancers that Gen Z is actually landing right now. And you can actually check them right over here. And it's not a promotion, and it's just real options. And that's a sweet video from me. And if this video hits any different, share it with one of your Gen Z friends, your brothers or sister who actually needs to hear this. And I would really appreciate you if you could like, comment about your experience, and also subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.